So now we're going to work on word problems, kind of with, they're going to talk about interest and, annually, and you might think, oh, do I have to use the interest formula? No, you don't. Okay? Read through this. It says, Susan purchased some municipal blah, 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 yielding 5% annually, and blah, 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 yielding 10% annually. If Susan's investment amounts to $20,000 and the annual income is $1,500, how much money is invested in bonds and how much money is invested in certificates of deposit? Okay. So, wow, they just gave you a bunch of information. So now you just need to know how to put that information. Oh, look, this question just wants you to set up the system of equations. It doesn't even want you to solve it. All you have to do is set up the system of equations correctly. So let's go ahead and do that. So Susan purchased some municipal bonds, yielding 5% annually. So, yeah. Then there's certificate of deposit, yielding 10% annually. So let's define what x equals and y equals. Why do we have to start with this? See, it's asking you how much money is invested in bonds and certificates of deposit. This is crucial information right here. This is understanding what the problem is looking for. And right now, it's asking for two things. That's why we have an x equals and a y equals, because we're going to need to find what x equals, and we're going to need to find what y equals. Let's say x is money invested in bonds. So y would be what? Money invested in certificates of deposit. Why? Because that's what we're looking for. The question's asking how much money is invested in bonds. Well, if I find what x equals, that means whatever x is the money in bonds that I found. How much money is invested in certificates of deposits? Well, I don't know what it is, so I'm going to just say that it's y for now. But whatever I find is going to be money in certificates of deposit. This is very important right here, understanding what x and y are. Some teachers will look for this in the beginning, and they'll mark you off if you don't have this right here. Okay? So you have to define your variables, and then you got to start solving. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and solve it. We have municipal bonds yielding 5% annually, and some certificates depositing 10% annually. Okay, so they're yielding stuff. But if Susan's investment amounts to $20,000, okay, let's think about this. Okay, X is the money invested in bonds, and Y is the money invested in certificates of deposit. Sure, that's how much Susan spent in investments. So if Susan's investments amount to $20,000, well, she spent all of her money. She spent all of it either investing it in money for bonds or money in, certificates of deposit. She invested all of her money, and that investment amounts to $20,000. So the money that she invested in bonds, which is X, plus the money she invested in certificates of deposit, which is Y, amounts to $20,000. This is usually the easiest step, and you'll see this a lot. With all these word problems, a lot of times there's an x plus y equals blah blah blah, And as long as you understand this equation, the second one's a lot easier to understand. You have x plus y equals 20,000. Yes, money invested in bonds plus money invested in certificates of deposit equals 20,000 because of this sentence I'm circling in green right here. This phrase. Okay? Now we just need to find the second one. Now, this was a little trickier. It's asking yielding 5% annually and 10% annually. Okay? So we're probably going to have to use these numbers. That's an important concept to understand. Most of the time in these word problems, you're going to use all of those numbers at least once. Okay? So it's yielding 5% annually and 10% annually. They're both annually. Don't worry about annually. Don't worry about it. But, this is a number I didn't use yet. See, the income. What's yielding? Yielding is basically another word for how much income you receive, right? If the municipal bonds, if X is yielding 5% annually, so when I put in $100, in bonds. Invest $100. If they're yielding 5% annually, that means I get $5 back, right? So 5% of 100 is $5. So, you know, we have 5% annually. 5% is 0.05. Very careful with that. Understanding how percentages work with decimals, 0.05. Okay? Times what? If the municipal bonds yield 5% annually. So the municipal bonds, 5% of X will give you how much the municipal bonds you make from, putting the money in. So what? We had 0.05x. And then what? The certificates of deposit yields 10% annually. How much money is invested in certificates of deposit? Y. How much do you get back? 10%. That's why we have 0.10y. 0.05x. And if you add up all the money that you invested and received back, what do you add up to? What's the only number you didn't use yet? 1,500. These are your two equations. In this problem, if you got this problem on the test, you just end right here. You are done, and you are going to get full points, as long as you remember to put this. This is your system of equations to solve for this problem. If you want to actually solve it, then you use use the elimination method, use the substitution method, however you want. But this is the equation, and usually this is the hardest part for most people. If you have any questions, just don't be afraid to comment or email graced.tutor@gmail.com. graced.tutor@gmail.com. Alright, hope you guys liked this video.